Welcome to the Passive Income Podcast. I am your host, Dividend Dave. Thank you so much for joining us on another incredible episode. Be sure to subscribe. I have so many upcoming incredible guests that you will not want to miss. And I've also had so many guests in the past already, just in the last month. So make sure to go back and check out some of those podcasts as well. And speaking of incredible guests, Brandon at Green Candlelit. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Brandon, and give yourself a brief introduction, and we'll just go from there.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. As you said, I'm Brandon at Green Candle IT. I guess a little bit about me and Green Candle. I have a newsletter I write 2 a week, have some guest writers on there. I do Twitter Spaces on Tuesday nights and Friday afternoons. And I got two podcasts. One's the Macro Insights, kind of just general investing things, macroeconomics and the stock market, and sometimes there's a real estate guest here or there. And then on Fridays, I drop my State of Bitcoin podcast. So I do a little everything on here. So I
Cool.
appreciate you having me on, and I'm excited for this discussion.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. And I'm definitely interested to talk about Bitcoin and crypto as we get into this episode of the podcast. But let's first just maybe go over some of the different sectors in the market, sort of what you like, what you don't like, anything that comes up. I guess just for the viewers and listeners, um, Brandon is in Tampa, Florida. I'm in Ontario, Canada. So there's going to be some back and forth here where we're comparing the US and Canadian markets, some of the similarities, some of the differences. So, yeah, let's get right into it. One of the first sectors I always like to start off with is REITs. And as an American investor, probably the top of your list on REITs is Realty Income. So, any thoughts on O or any other REITs that you would like to discuss?
I personally don't own any REITs, and I don't really invest in any of the REITs. In the stock market, I own a duplex that I'm sitting in right now. That I live in half and Airbnb out the other half. But I don't discourage anybody from doing that. Obviously, not financial advice or anything like
Yeah,
that, because there is a big barrier to entry to kind of get in and do all that. But I think me personally, some of the benefits that I see is in real estate is you kind of have more control over it yourself. So you can, you know, you need a place to live. One, you
yep,
can kind of pick a market if you'd like to do some sort of long distance. Maybe it's unattainable in the area that you live, but you could buy one in a small town in, say Texas or something like that. And you could kind of control and do some research and figure out some growing areas, and maybe you can get lucky in that. Whereas when you invest in REITs and other stock market businesses, you don't really have too much control of it. You're kind of just judging it based off of other people, management, that kind of sort of
yep.
thing. And so that's kind of my draw to real estate. So that's why personally I don't invest in any REITs. And but like I said, I don't really discourage anybody from doing it. I just think that personally, I do think that there's a place for real estate in everybody's portfolio. It's just
Exactly.
how you kind of want to look at it. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I
And
have a couple of thoughts to your comments.
yeah.
One, great in under the 3 minute mark, we've already got in the non-financial advice, so that's great.
Of
We're just
course.
two guys having a discussion about investing, and that's all this is, right? Is just a discussion. But yeah, real estate, I'm kind of, I think, on the opposite end of the spectrum of you, which is why I like REITs, is because I don't want that phone call at 2 a.m. from a tenant that says, "Oh, I don't have, there's no hot water," or "the power's out," and you're like, "Well, guess what? Everybody's power is out," right? Like, or any of those phone calls at any time of the day or night. Whereas with REITs, you invest in that real estate, so you still have that position in real estate, but you're not dealing with the tenants. My other kind of point to you being in Tampa and having the other half of your duplex being an Airbnb, that's great. That's location, 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 right? You're in Florida. People go. Personally, myself as a Canadian, I've been to Florida a couple times. I've been to Tampa, so I understand that that's a draw, right? It really, it really does depend on location for doing those types of things. People aren't going to go. Not many people are going to go to, you know, Yellowknife. I'm guessing you don't know where Yellowknife even is.
No
It's in
idea.
northern Canada, and not many people go there, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I get it too. You know, I could have a long-term tenant. So I mean, there's positives and negatives to Airbnbs, right? There's more
Right,
turnover. You know, you got to deal with cleaners, you got to deal with all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, because there's more management to it, you make a little bit more money.
right,
But there's also, you know, that risk in there too, where it's like, especially coming up right now, where you know, the macro environment, the recession, you know, you can make arguments that we're already in it, or
yeah.
you know, we're getting there, you know, what
People are
have
going to
you.
take less holidays and not end up in Tampa, Florida. They're going to vacation more like the staycation, sort of close to home.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where I think like I kind of have, you know, a little bit of a benefit of being in Tampa because, you know, there is some other, you know, cities and things like that. I'm not necessarily in the panhandle where I have all that access to, you know, basically the southeast United States that'll drive down to, you know, some city up there like a Destin or something along those lines. But
Right,
um you know, I am still close enough to those areas where if somebody wants to make the trip down, I am very close to downtown Tampa, and you know, obviously we have sports teams and other things like that going on here
yeah,
as well. So I mean, I did have a long term tenant initially for a year, and then we saw rent kind of skyrocket, and the reason um, I went to Airbnb and posed another long term tenant is, you know, I was just kind of having some trouble finding an initial tenant because I'm in an in between area where I'm not exactly downtown, but I'm not exactly like up in the suburbs or like near USF. I'm like kind of 10 minutes from everything. And
good
so
location, location, location.
yeah, it's a good location, but you know, people were kind of looking at it at that time. It was right at the new year, right at 2021, where people were, or 2022, excuse me, so at the beginning of this year, and people were kind of looking at it like, all right, I can pay a couple $100 more and live downtown, or I could pay, you know, a couple $100 less and be, you know, 10 minutes up the road more, and then really what's the difference of 5, 10 more minutes drive to get to
Right,
downtown everywhere. So um you know, I was kind of in that in between spot. So marketing it, and I was just kind of getting annoyed. I was, you know, working my other jobs and stuff like that as well. So I had a friend that I was like, hey, if you want to run this for me, you know, you could be my property manager, whatnot. And she's like, well, did you ever consider doing Airbnb? I think you could make a couple fixes in this place, maybe put in some new paint and it'd be looking nice and we can make some good money. I'm like, all right, sure. You know,
yeah,
why not? I needed to do some fixing up to that unit as well. So, you know, I just kind of went for it. And, you know, to be honest, so far it's been great. Um, I have it majority occupied most of the time. So, I mean, I
nice.
think I might need to maybe tweak a little bit of that
Yeah,
price per night, but at the same time, like it's going really well. So, fingers crossed that everything kind of still stays this way. And you know, at the end of the day, too, it's my only property. I live in it, and I can, you know, afford the mortgage if needed.
nice.
So it's one of those things where I decided to kind of take that risk on it too. And because I have that property manager, I don't really deal with the tenants or anything like
Right,
that, or leaky
yeah.
toilets or anything like that. And so, you know, it is less cash flow because I do that, but you know, it's still more than I would in the long
Oh,
term.
your audio. Okay, I think we're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah. So a couple points
Okay.
there about we were talking in our I'm going to call it the pregame about Tampa's sports teams, how well they've done over these past few years. The Tampa Bay Lightning obviously winning a couple Stanley Cups. The Tampa Bay Rays, I think they've won a World Series and have been close a couple times. And obviously the football team signing Tom Brady. So Tampa Bay's had a really good run in the sports world in the last few years, and obviously that brings people into the city as well. So having an Airbnb can definitely capitalize on that 100%, I'm sure. And then, just out of curiosity, again, as a Canadian, and knowing how many Canadians go to Florida like every winter, I'm just curious how many Canadians have you booked into your Airbnb? Like a
That's a good
percentage,
question.
like is
Yeah, I've had only, I think I've only had 2 out of the country. One came from Puerto Rico, and I actually haven't had a Canadian yet.
that's
I believe it was.
surprising because
Yeah,
there's Canadians in Florida all the time, and there's always a lot of Canadians in Florida. Like that's
yeah, I know that now that I mean, I have ran into quite a few. Obviously, we have, a big hockey presence down here too, so I've
yeah.
ran into some just outside of, hockey players and whatnot, but, yeah, I just haven't had any book, I guess. I don't know what it is. Maybe they don't like my area or what, I don't know, but
Well,
there
maybe
are
it's
a lot.
marketing. Maybe you just need to market to the Canadian audience, and suddenly those bookings fill up more.
Yeah, exactly, just offer, like, a shot of Molson, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe some maple syrup stocked up in there or something, I don't know.
Oh, that's funny. That's so stereotypical, but so true.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, moving on from REITs and real estate. Next on my list is energy. What energy stocks are you looking at? Anything you in energy sector that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah. So I mean, as far as stocks, I think like the oil and gas companies,
Yeah,
just in general, they're going to do really well. I think we're in a very, very interesting time in energy. If anybody's been kind of around my stuff at any point in time, I have Dr. Anas Alhaji on a lot of my spaces, and he's a very well known keynote speaker in the energy sector, and so he kind of details, essentially, like I don't know, like how else to say it, but the Europe is seemingly screwed. I don't know if I could swear on this show or not, but
yeah. Screwed is PG. I think we can keep it to that. But you're correct. Europe, like
yeah,
this little tiny war that Russia decides to invade Ukraine, and you look at that from a global perspective, thinking, well, Russia's this huge country with this massive military. They should just plow over Ukraine. And it should have been over. You would have thought that was going to be over in like 3, 4 weeks. They were just going to take over Ukraine. That was sort of an end of story. And here we are going on 10, 10 months later. It's coming up on a year real soon, right? And it's obviously, Germany is so dependent on Russian oil and gas, which is just like you said, it's screwed the European market. So yeah, I mean we could probably do another whole podcast just on the European energy crisis. And for some reason, somehow that's affected North America as well.
yeah, no, it definitely has, and I think because at the end of the day, right now, as everything stands, everything is a very globalistic. It's a very globalistic economy, global
Yep.
economy. Everything's kind of connected, and at the end of the day, everything's connected to energy, no matter what it is. Right? You
Right.
need fuel to drive whatever groceries to the grocery store. You need energy to have the lights on, energy to keep meat packaged and cold in order for people to keep their food fresh and everything like that too. So I think it's going to be a real interesting time for energy. I think I don't have any specific companies, but I do own a uranium ETF and a nuclear ETF because I think there's going to be obviously winners and losers in every sector, every
Yep.
subsector. But I think overall, the kind of transition to nuclear energy is going to be huge. And I know that Germany even amidst all of this hubbub about being so dependent on Russia for oil and gas, surprisingly they kind of shut off the nuclear plants initially, but I think they're kind of going back on that right now.
Yeah.
So
You
I
would
I mean
think
I
they
think
have to bring them back online.
yeah,
Anything
exactly, and
they've shut down, like I don't know the background there of what Germany has as far as nuclear power plants, but anything they've shut down, if it's feasible for them to bring it back online, you would think they would seriously be thinking about having to do that, right?
yeah, exactly, and I think Russia is still very energy to, I guess, energy strong, or I don't I'm missing on the word right now, but
No, I know what you mean. They're one of the biggest players in the world, right? Like for that production of the oil and gas, along with the US, along with Canada, along with Saudi Arabia, Iraq, right? Like we know where the oil and gas comes from. Venezuela. Somehow Venezuela is the poorest rich country. I don't understand how that's happened, but that's again, that could be a whole other podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, like we said, a lot of it has kinda had to do with a lot of the green energy policies, right? So I think we might kinda see a backtrack on that,
Yeah,
so that's makes me kinda bullish on a lot of the American oil and gas companies like Exxon, Shell, those kind of,
yeah,
companies, because I think, at the end of the day, there's more than likely seems like there's gonna be a change in tide in the, American political system. It just seems like with the recession and all this massive amounts of inflation, the American people are pretty frustrated. I know we got the midterms going on right now, so it'll kind of be interesting to see how those things kind of play out. But um, I
inflation's
think,
killing everyone.
yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, we can get into that a little bit later, about how, I view it's bad in the US, but I think it's a lot worse, everywhere else. But,
Yeah,
I think, I think at the end of the day, a lot of these green energy policies that have forced, Shell, Exxon, a lot of these companies to shut down some of their rigs in the United States.
yeah,
They're gonna kind of start to try to come back online soon, because the U.S. has been depleting a lot of their oil reserves, and
yeah,
every time they kind of build them back up, they keep deploying more to kind of just deflate that oil and or that gas price, even though it's still, it's still kind of like a almost like a crisis at this point. So
yes,
I think like that's going to run out, and they're going to be, it's going to be a bright future for a lot of these companies. But in the short term, it might be a little tough. But
yeah.
it seems like it's going to be a little tough for a lot of these companies, just globally anyway, right?
So, as you may or may not know, the province of Alberta is the biggest oil producing province in Canada, and I see a very much a mirror to your statement there. A lot of companies struggling right now, but very possible, probable that in the near to not too distant future, those companies could have a good outlook because, like what we're saying, we just need to bring more online to replenish those reserves or just kind of keep going in general, right? And to add to your point about everyone needing energy, again, I'm in Canada and you're down there in the nice warm south. You didn't mention heating your house all winter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I don't have to deal with that. I just have to deal with, cooling it in the summer, right?
Right.
So um yeah, I know, you kind of mentioned, or I mentioned earlier, like Bitcoin and whatnot, and I kind of think that there's going to be maybe a transition into, using some of those computers and everything like that to kind of start to heat homes. And I know Alberta, where you're at, that's a very popular. I had a the chief mining officer Ben Gagnon from Bit Farms on my State of Bitcoin podcast,
Oh, wow.
week, and he was talking about how they use a lot of hydroelectric power there. They have
Yeah.
a bunch of plants up there. I think they have 7 different facilities, and right now they just these machines build up a lot of heat, right?
Right.
So what they do with that heat right now is just release it, and so I think, obviously I can't predict the future or anything like that, but I think at the end of the day, there might be some sort of future where we use, different kinds of energy and we use them to mine Bitcoin, and then that heat runoff is used to heat homes
Yeah.
or something along that. So I mean, that was something I was working on at one point in time, and now I've kind of bitten off too much I can't choose.
Yeah.
So I've kind of put that project on a hold for now. But yeah, I definitely think that there's going to be more innovative ways, whether it's that, whether
Yeah.
it's nuclear, or uranium or something along those lines too. I think there's going to be a lot of different energy sources. People are going to start to, get a little bit more innovative with it.
Definitely.
But I think, there's a lot of limitations with the current, quote unquote, green energy solutions with
Right.
electric or solar and wind right now. So I think there's going to be a big development in that in the next couple years, and I think that's going to be out of, what's going on right now with, the seemingly the energy crisis that's going on in Europe. So
I have a couple points there. Just one minor correction. I'm actually in Ontario, not Alberta. No big deal.
sorry
Um,
about that. It's all Canada to me.
yeah, just but that sort of to further to your point about energy and different ways. I work in a food manufacturing plant. We use a lot of heated water in the manufacturing process, and we actually recycle that heated water through our like heating pipes. So we use the hot water to also heat the office space of the plant. And that's exactly to your point of finding innovative ways to reuse, recycle, not waste energy, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of things that are going on like that, especially in like, the Bitcoin space, right? There's a lot of I guess FUD around that where people think,
Always.
yeah, people think that the miners are not using quote unquote green energy, but big part of that right now is in oil fields, they release their flare gas after, all the fracking and everything like that, kind of
Right.
obtaining it from the ground. And so, what a lot of miners are doing, or mining companies are doing, is taking in that flare gas, which is just essentially released energy into the atmosphere, and using that to power the computers. So, I agree with you. I think whether it's Bitcoin or something else, maybe Bitcoin just fails and nothing else comes from it. But at the
Who
very
knows?
least, I think that there's becoming some innovative way
Yeah.
to reuse some of this wasted energy, and I think that's like a pretty significant innovation we got coming on here. So
Yeah, definitely. So, moving on from the energy sector, another one of my favorite sectors is banking financial. And as you probably know, the Canadian banks are extremely strong. And I know some of the American banks are also very strong. Obviously, you have your JP Morgan Chase, you have your Bank of Americas. The big difference between Canada and the US is Canada basically has these big five banks plus a very few amount of regional banks, whereas in the US, there's way too many to count regional banks. Probably every state has their own regional bank, like First Bank of Wisconsin, First Bank of Texas, First Bank of Nebraska, and I'm sure the list goes on, right? So,
exactly.
anything in the banking slash financial sector that you would like to address?
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally I don't know how I really feel about banks. I mean, as I've said it a few times, I'm more of a Bitcoin guy here. So I
Right.
think that there's a lot of things going on in the banking industry that are not great right now, and I think that there's a lot of innovation here. But I see you're pulling up these Canadian banks dividends. They do seem really juicy, so maybe I need to get in on some of those, huh?
Yeah,
Um,
so this is again, it's a tweet from at settling nomad. So thank you again for putting this together. I've pulled this up on probably about four, maybe five straight podcasts in a row now. It's just simply way too impressive not to talk about. So BNS is Bank of Nova Scotia, paying a dividend since 1833.
wow.
CIBC, that's CM, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, paying a dividend since 1868. Bank of Montreal since 1829, Royal Bank since 1870, Toronto Dominion since 1857. So 1829, Bank of Montreal. In 7 years' time, they will be celebrating their 200th anniversary, 200 years of paying dividends.
Yeah, that's not going anywhere for
Can
sure.
you can you think of any other companies? And this is like the whole sector, like so 200 years there, but Royal Bank 1870, so 150. They're all over 150 years. Any other sector anywhere that has been paying dividends for 150 to 200 years.
Yeah, no, I can't for sure. I mean, this seems super appealing, as an investment for sure. I've actually gotten into a little bit more of, I guess, the fintech, financial, technological sector.
Right.
So, I don't own any banks, and I haven't really done it too much research on that, sector. But I mean, it seems like the Canadian banks got it figured out, so maybe
Yeah.
I need to figure out a way to get some exposure to that in my portfolio because I do like the dividend stocks. I think that there's a lot of benefit for that too, and I need to get a little bit more exposure to that. I think as well.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, the exposure I got to the financial industry, the biggest position I have in that sector is Square or Block now, because they're kind of like on the payment rail system. And now they got Cash App, which some people are using as like a bank, and some aren't.
Yep.
With like the debit card and whatnot. Um, so I kind of like those plays, but I think like when with banks, they've been around for so long. there is a lot of innovation going on right now, especially in that industry. So that's the
Right.
one thing that kind of worries me is that, okay, are they going to get hit kind of hard initially and then kind of have to come around to, this new, more digital world? But it seems like they've got it figured out as far as the dividend goes, and
Yeah.
they haven't. It hasn't been hurting them since. So I mean, they're obviously a very trusted name, and yeah, I'm sure that that would be a pretty good one to own. So
Yeah, they're
I'm
solid. So, and again, we just basically call them the top 5. Like I said, there are a few regional banks. There's even, like, sort of a 6th one that sometimes makes the list, but that's basically those top 5 that I just pulled up on that chart. Um, Obviously, I don't own any of them outright. I do hold them in at least one ETF, possibly a couple, so I do have some exposure to them. I do hope to one day start to sort of build in any or all of them because, again, yeah, that paying a dividend for nearly 200 years, it's just impressive to say the least. And just, I guess, one final thought on that. Obviously, they're all available on the TSX, the Toronto Stock Exchange, but I'm quite sure that they're all available on the the New York Exchange as well for any American viewers or listeners.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can probably find them at some of your whatever it is. Maybe like a Robinhood or Charles Schwab or something
I'm
along
sure.
those too. Yeah, so I'm
I'm
sure.
almost, yeah.
Yeah,
Actually, I did the podcast with at Scoreboard Investor, and we were actually talking about, we somehow got off on a tangent about some of the different stadium names and how they used to have like cool stadium names like Candlestick Park, but now they built a new stadium. It's called AT&T Park. But some
yeah,
of the Canadian banks have, like, in Boston, it's TD Gardens, and in Carolina for the Hurricanes is I think RBC is the sponsor, which is Royal Bank. I believe they're the sponsor of that stadium slash arena. So the Canadian banks do have a presence in the US, right?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, they definitely do, and I think but like you said, there is a lot of regional ones. I think there's kind of like the growing industry of just like the online banks with no like
Yeah.
retail footprint. Of course, there's still like the Chase banks and Wells Fargo and those kind of things too, but um, I do think like the Canadian banks do have like an influence here. And then there, of course, like I think when I was in college, I went to University of Memphis for my undergrad, and I had I banked there at the First Bank of Tennessee. So I mean, it's just like you
So
said,
to my
there's
example, like every state, the first bank
yeah,
of state name, right?
yeah, exactly. So I think going back to all that, yeah, it is pretty interesting, the whole banking sector. I think like BNY Mellon, I want to say, or something like that, is the biggest bank here, or the oldest bank here in the United States. And the reason I know that name is just because I think they just started offering Bitcoin custody to their customers. So yeah, I mean, the banking industry is pretty interesting, and it seems like they're very successful at offering all these businesses or dividends for such a long time.
Yeah,
So, if you're looking for a good dividend stock, that one that looks a little juicy to me.
exactly. Again, not financial advice.
Yeah.
One last point about the Canadian banking and the sports. I also believe that, again, RBC Royal Bank, I'm quite sure they do sponsor the Canadian Open PGA golf tournament, but I think they also sponsor a few other PGA golf tournaments in Carolina or perhaps Florida down south somewhere. That's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
a total aside.
yeah. No, I mean, I'm sure they do. I don't really know, so I can't speak too much on that. Do they spot? No, it's because like it's the Rogers Center, right? Where the is that the Toronto Blue Jays stadium?
Yeah, so great segue into telecoms.
Yeah, there we go.
And so this is the one where I see a lot more similarity between Canada and the US, because in Canada we have the top 3 being Bell Canada, TELUS, and Rogers. And in this day and age, they've become more than just telecommunications companies, they've also become media companies, and you're correct, there's Rogers Place, Rogers Stadium, Rogers Arena in Toronto, Edmonton, and Vancouver, and I'm not even sure which one's which, they just attach the names of place, stadium, and arena to them. But sort of back to my point of the similarity where you have the big 3 in the US as well being your AT&T, your Verizon, your T-Mobile, and then you have your other smaller players. And also to that similar point, another one of my guests was mentioning, I think, was it Verizon that was involved in a deal with Comcast and maybe
Yeah,
AT&T in a deal with Warner Brothers, so they're also becoming more like media companies, not just telecommunications companies?
yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, like just like you said, it seems like these these internet companies and kind of yeah, but it's interesting, right? So where I'm at, I have like a couple options for internet. I have like Spectrum and maybe one other. I can't think of the name, but I have Spectrum internet at my house. But a lot of these regions, you just have one, really one player
Yeah,
in the internet realm. And at this day and age, you basically need internet. So a lot of
yeah,
these places have monopolies. A lot of these companies have monopolies in certain sectors, and so, of course, like the more densely populated ones, they have more of an option. But, in some of these areas, some of these cities too, I mean, like Tampa, like I said, is a very big city, and I have two options. So, at
that's crazy.
yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, you know, there's almost a monopoly on that. But AT&T is probably the biggest one if I had to say, because I think they have not only just phone to telecommunication, they have internet services as well,
Yeah,
and then obviously they just bought, I believe they just bought Warner Brothers, or one of these media companies like
right.
that. So I think like AT&T is probably the biggest play, and it has shut down a lot recently. I actually was kind of going back and forth with somebody on Twitter today because they felt like the AT&T's earnings had a bigger impact on Meta, which I didn't see how they're connected
Well, yeah,
any.
where's that connection?
I don't know. I mean, because I've been kind of saying. I mean, this is kind of getting off on a tangent, but I've been saying that growth companies and Meta are kind of going down the tank, and I don't think that that company is going to be along or around for that much longer. So, but
Right.
that's maybe another point. Maybe we could get into that a little bit later. But I think as far as like the telecommunication companies go, I don't know how it is in Canada, but it seems like here in the United States, for internet providers, they have seemingly a monopoly in certain areas,
Yeah,
and for phone, if there's like really like two or three options, and you can maybe go for one of the cheaper ones, but those are owned by the big guys. People don't
right.
really realize that. So, um, I think I think like AT&T might be one of the more popular ones. Obviously Verizon maybe second, and then I think T-Mobile third.
Right.
I want to say T-Mobile was purchased by Verizon, if I
Oh,
don't.
really?
Yeah, I want to say I saw something like that, or there was maybe an attempt on that, and
Right.
maybe it was blocked because of monopoly, but like some monopoly law
Yeah.
in the U.S. But I'm gonna look into that. But I want to hear your thoughts real quick on like the telecommunication sector in Canada and in the U.S. Just kind of as
Yeah,
an outside.
so kinda similar that, we do have these, less expensive providers where you can get whatever brand name they might be, where it's just like sort of a talk and text plan for the cheapest rate, like a $30 a month plan or whatever. But again, they are generally owned by the bigger players. Um, Again, also your Bells, Telus, and Rogers are also internet providers, so telecommunications, internet, media. I'm in a very rural area, w- which means I have one option for internet. It's called ExploreNet, which is separate from those big 3 somehow. I don't know, it hasn't really been, um, absorbed or swallowed up or gobbled up by any of those big 3 as of yet. I don't think it's going to. ExploreNet has gotten very big as far as servicing the internet in rural Canada. Rural Canada, obviously, there's a lot to rural Canada. um, yeah. So, and then kind of further to your point, there's another not so much telecom company, but called Shaw Communications. They also trade on the New York Stock Exchange. They trade on Toronto as well, obviously. But Rogers was trying to take them over about 6 or 8 months ago. I honestly don't know where that went. I know there was, again, kind of same ideas of rulings of monopoly, this and that. So I don't think it was ever finalized, and that's sort of my knowledge to that as of this point. I just haven't seen it in the headlines now for like I said, 6 or 8 months. So I haven't dug any deeper. Like obviously you pull up your whatever business news website you look at and you read your headlines and maybe you click on a couple articles, and then when it's not a headline anymore, you kind of forget about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I did look into the T-Mobile merger, and that happened with Sprint. So Sprint was like the fourth player. So
Right,
a third and fourth kind of mixed together, and they're still like, I mean, it just kind of speaks to the size of AT&T and Verizon,
right.
because they're still, massively bigger than T-Mobile and Sprint. So, but yeah, I mean, just kind of like you said, I think that there are going to be reliable businesses. Um, Granted, they've taken a little bit more of a risk, at least in the United States, kind of becoming a little bit more of media companies. Um, but
Yeah,
at the end of the day, they're going to be seeing reliable revenue with, whatever internet provider is. That's kind of a sticky moat. Usually people get in their internet service, and unless there's something severely bad that happens, they're not changing their internet.
right.
Somebody's not going to get the internet installed and then, get a new one the next month. They're usually locked in for a couple years. They're renting the equipment, they're doing all that kind of stuff. They usually just set it and forget it. And so same kind of thing with their phone, unless their phone bill and they just get so frustrated with everything, how it goes. Generally speaking, people kind of stay with the same phone. They like to keep the same phone number, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So,
So we
um,
actually had a ruling you can switch companies in Canada and take your phone number with you.
really, I think you can here in the US as well, but because I think like I started off on T-Mobile and now I'm on AT&T, but it is one of those things too. Like it's still like I switched one time and I've had AT&T now. I don't know how many years, but I've had it for quite some time. So,
Right.
um, as long as it's relatively good price, not anything astronomically more than the other guys. I think like most people just kind of said, like I said, set it and forget it. And
Yeah.
so
So
it's a good
speaking of
business to be
price,
in. Go ahead.
Canada pays the highest cell phone rates in the world by
Why
far.
is that? Do you know?
Well, because they're extremely good at gouging. They say the reason is because Canada is such a big country with such a low population, which it does kind of make sense. The last time I looked it up, which actually wasn't that long ago, the next highest was, I believe, South Africa, but we were still like 15% above their cell phone rates. So yeah,
Wow.
we pay a lot for cell phone in Canada.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I had no idea on that. I knew that you guys paid like as far as like energy usage goes, Canada has the most of any country in the world. But yeah, I didn't know. I mean, obviously that's because of your harsh winters and everything like that
Yeah.
across the country. But um, I didn't know that about the cell phones, but it does kind of make sense because there's probably like less towers and things like that too. So.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of like if you go up to northern Ontario, there's a lot of places where there's no cell phone coverage, or anywhere north, right? Where there's just more polar bears than people.
I'm
And that's
sure.
not
I'm
even
sure.
exaggeration.
Yeah, I'm sure that's like that too. So, I'm gonna stay down here in sunny Florida where I don't have to really worry about the winters or anything like that. So,
Well, you
uh,
said you grew up in Chicago, so you know what winters are all about. Chicago has
yeah, well,
some harsh winters
that's
as
why I'm
well.
down here. That's why I'm down here. I just had to escape those.
Been there, done that.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So just I guess quickly, last point on the telecoms, both on both sides of the border, good companies, good dividend paying stocks. Not financial advice, but I hold a small, very small position in Bell. I hold in that same ETF I was talking about, the banks. It also has positions in some of the telecoms as well. So yeah, moving on from the telecoms, another sector I like to discuss is healthcare, because that's obviously very different between Canada and the US. And actually, I this before I throw it over to you, I have one called Northwest Healthcare, which is actually a REIT that invests in healthcare properties. So I like it for a couple of reasons. It does cover two sectors at once, but it also pays that healthy monthly dividend. So, anyways, yeah, that's just one of my healthcare plays. Going to throw it over to you to sort of discuss anything in the healthcare sector.
Yeah, for sure. So I do like I said at the beginning of the show, I do a newsletter, and usually how I kind of structure it is I break down a sector, and then I do three companies, three of the bigger ones, and then an ETF in that sector, and I drop that newsletter every Monday. And one of them ones that I recently did was on the healthcare sector. So it kind of worked out pretty well that you're bringing this one up. But I
Yeah,
think like it's for me, and the interesting part about the healthcare sector, I think for me, is that there's so many aspects about it, especially in the United States. Obviously, in Canada, you guys have, you know, uh, insurance provided by, or healthcare kind of provided by the government.
yeah,
Is that
universal healthcare.
yeah,
Actually, it's not. It's all the first world countries except for the U.S. It's Canada, UK, Australia, Sweden, Norway,
yeah,
Germany. Every first
exactly.
world country looks at the U.S. and goes, "Why don't you guys have this too?"
Hey, I mean, I don't know. I mean, personally, I kind of like the way that we have it because, I think, yeah, I kind of mentioned, or I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, maybe it was pre-show, but I went to the University of Memphis. I ran track there, and for some odd reason, our women's soccer team has a big connection to Canada. So, like, I think like at that time when I went there, like 80% of the team was Canadian. Um,
The
so
girls on the
we
team were Canadian girls playing soccer for U of M,
Yep,
Memphis.
exactly. Yeah. So we would have a lot of them, and you know, at the end of the day, they would tell me after they get some injuries, whether it's like a knee injury or something kind of more significant, they would come down to the States to get the surgery because in Canada the waiting list was so long.
Right.
And so I mean, I think there's positives and negatives to it. If you're an active user of the healthcare system, it's great. But if maybe if you're a younger age like me and you don't really go to the doctor as frequently, you
Right.
know, uh, getting that health insurance and stuff like that, it's probably just fine. I mean, and a lot of people in the United States too, they get their health coverage paid for by companies, and so
The companies
what
they
that
work for.
yeah, exactly. And what that kind of brings me to is like the biggest healthcare company in the United States is United Health Group, which is kind of a jack of all trades. They've got insurance and all that kind of stuff as well. And I kind of like those businesses more because, as I said, with the stickiness of the telecom companies, I like the stickiness of the health insurance companies in the U.S. And I also kind of like the retail stores too, like CVS and Walgreens, because if you live within a proximity of a CVS and you are getting a lot of pharmaceutical drugs, which whether or not you agree with all the kind of pharmaceutical uses going on in the United States is neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Regardless of that point, if you have one down the street from you, you're not going to change from going and go drive 30 minutes to some other one. You're going to
Right.
continue to go to that CVS at your end of your block. So I think the stickiness of those companies is great. I'm not a huge fan in a lot of these like biotech kind of companies. If you can kind of categorize those in the healthcare industry, I don't really know. Like maybe like a Pfizer or Moderna or anything like that. Because I
Yeah.
think,
You probably
those,
can.
yeah, because those are a lot of boom and bust.
Yeah.
And you know, I, I just think there's a lot more inherent risk with those ones. Maybe you got lucky with some of that. You heard rumblings about the COVID vaccines and whatnot, but I think, as far as that kind of sector goes, at least, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in Florida, it's basically done with at this
Right.
point. So, I think for me, the companies that I like in this healthcare industry are a lot of the United Health groups and the CVS companies that
Right.
kind of have that moat, and they don't seem to be going anywhere. They're just steady, reliable, and yeah, they're
You
going
could
to keep
almost put Walmart into the, like, if you're gonna count CVS, you have your pharmacy at Walmart, you have your pharmacy
exactly,
at so many other, uh, sort of your retail grocery stores that also have a pharmacy, and if they're trading on the stock market, you'd almost, like I said with my Northwest Healthcare where it doubles sectors, you could say like, "Hey, Walmart has a little piece of the healthcare sector too, right?" I guess
Yeah.
it does. I'd never thought of it that way before.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, like, all right, so like I grew up in Texas, so the grocery store there is HEB, and here in Florida it's Publix, right? So
Yeah,
if you could go to Publix and get your flu shot or what, pick up your stuff while you're getting groceries, like, people are going to do that.
yeah,
So, um, I think like at the end of the day, that's enough exposure where it's like it just kind of depends on like what you're kind of looking to get. Because I like a lot of these companies where they have like a very strong moat. They have like a couple different industries. They're not very, you know, I guess, singularly focused in a sense. Like they're big enough now where they have enough, kind of hands in different piles, and so
right.
like it'll take a lot for that company to fail when I'm looking at some of these industries. Granted, there's not probably as much boom or bust for a lot of these companies, but I think like especially in a time like now when there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, there's a lot of uncertainty in the global economy. I think like a lot of these companies with a lot of area or a lot of they gain a lot of revenue in a bunch of different areas are probably the safer bet, at least for me in my perspective. Obviously not financial advice. So
Yeah. No, and another great segue because consumer staples is on on my list of sectors to talk about. So you have your WalMarts, your I'm not sure if Publix is a publicly traded company or not. I'm guessing it
I think
might
so.
be.
I
Um,
don't think so. I'm not sure, but I
and
don't
then
think so.
Costco's in that consumer staples. Probably I'm guessing Costco's probably some of them have pharmacies. I don't go into Costco's too often, so I'm not even sure. But um, yeah, like I said, just sort of a segue into consumer staples. Anything in that sector that
Yeah.
impresses you?
Yeah. I
That's where
mean,
you've got your Coke, your Pepsi, like, everything, right?
yeah, so I think like a lot of these industries, it's especially like a Walmart, right? So what I'm looking at are companies that are kind of, I guess, more targeted towards the middle American right now, right? Because
Yeah,
when it comes to tough times, no matter how wealthy you are or whatever, like you might not go shopping at Whole Foods when it's in the midst of a recession, or you got a Whole Foods right next to you, and you just lost your job. You're probably going to go to Walmart or an Aldi or
yeah,
some sort of store to kind of save some money and try to cut some costs. And I think like the most obvious place where people kind of try to do that is when it comes to shopping and food and just like everyday expenses and those consumer staples. So I think those with the uncertain environment are going to be pretty strong. And I'll be looking at those companies too that have a lot of their own brands because they save a lot of money when people kind of go and flock towards those,
the
whether
private
it's a
label.
Target brand or a Walmart brand or what have you. So I think as far as those goes, I think Walmart, I would definitely consider getting into, and they're going to see a dip in purchasing and everything like that. Obviously, we're getting close to the holidays here, so I'm not sure quite when this is getting released, but you always see that kind of increase in revenue towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think Walmart's going to be good. Maybe a Target, and maybe if you could get some exposure to some of those like cheaper, everyday products that people just know and love, right? So Coca-Cola, Pepsi, what have you. I think those are going to get in for the long run. And I think not it's not just like Coke, right? So Coke owns Powerade and all those other kind of drinks as
So
well. So,
many.
yeah.
I'm sure you've
So
probably seen the chart, on Twitter or wherever else that breaks down the grocery store into basically 10.
5 companies, yeah.
Yeah, like, you've got your General Mills, your Procter& and Gamble, your Coke and Pepsi, your Kellogg's, and sort of a few others. I can't remember exactly everything that's on that chart. I'm sure you've probably seen it, and that all the brands within those companies, right? Your Kraft Heinz obviously is one of those big players as well, and all the brands inside that umbrella makes it
Yeah,
very attractive.
yeah,
Further
it's
to
very
your point, sorry to cut you off, but further to your point about sort of going through a recession, my point is people are going to eat every single day, whether it's a recession or not. You have to eat, right? So that's why the consumer staples like your Walmarts and Costco's, I think, are good plays. obviously here in Canada we have other grocery stores as well that are on the Toronto Stock Exchange. You can also obviously buy U.S. stocks in Canada, but again, that's an aside. But I'm just saying the grocery stores are a solid pick through a recession because people still have to eat.
Yeah, exactly, and I agree with you 100%. And I think that that's gonna kind of that trend is not going anywhere, right? I mean, people are always gonna have to eat, but they might be looking for maybe a little bit more cheaper options at
Yes.
this point. So, I think it's an interesting play, and I think it just I think overall we're gonna see like a big dip in the stock market in general. Um, we might see some mini run ups here or there, but I think like we're kind of in for maybe a little bit of darker times in the near future. But I think that just means they're cheaper for for those who have a little bit of a longer time horizon. So
Yeah.
I think the outlook on some consumer staples is really good.
Yeah, so just on a personal level, like dealing with inflation, these last few months going grocery shopping, there's been kind of going to your point about sort of cutting back a little bit. Yeah, there's been lots of times where it's like, you know what, I'm not going to buy a couple bags of chips this week because I don't need potato chips. Sure, they're a nice thing to have, but I don't need those to survive. I do need other like sustainable food to survive, right? So
Yeah,
that's kind of my
exactly.
point to inflation and recession and just on a very personal level. It's like you got to find ways to deal with it, basically, right?
Oh, 100%. And I think that that's kind of continue, right? So, um, yeah, I just think it'll be interesting to see how a lot of these companies and things like that, the earnings that come out. Maybe not, you won't see it this quarter, but especially coming up on the holidays, right? Are people going to be splurging as much on those
Right.
holiday dinners? A lot of different factors, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It's going to be something that I think is definitely something to look out for, as especially like right now we're seeing a lot of growth stocks and the FANG stocks even getting taking a huge hit. So I don't think we're going to see the consumer staples quite hit that hit, but
Right.
maybe we'll see them start to miss expectations by a good amount, or change expectations like midway through the quarter.
Okay, last on my list is technology, and I know that earnings came out today or recently for uh, Meta and I think Google and a bunch of others. But honestly, I don't really want to talk about those stocks because I want to talk about the technology of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency with you. So let's talk a little bit about crypto as we get to the end of this podcast episode.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, like I've kind of said it a couple times. I'm got a podcast and everything like that. I'm really interested in those kind of companies. Um, One thing that I'm worried about right now, it kind of mixes in with the energy sector, is a lot of these Bitcoin mining companies. So I'm as far as like Bitcoin and crypto goes, I'm a Bitcoin and Bitcoin only guy. So those are the kind of things that I look at, whether it's companies or the actual physical asset. The asset actually, like Bitcoin took a little run up today. I think it hit 21K. Um, but I do think it's going to kind of flatline overall as the price goes compared to the US dollar price. I think it's going to kind of float around this 17 to 22, 23K range for quite some time until we get closer to the next halving. For your listeners that might not know, every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin that's mined gets cut in half. And so that
So, am
difficulty.
I correct though that it's not so since Bitcoin became a thing in say 2009, it's happened to be every 4 years. But am I correct to say that it has more to do with the block, the blocks on the blockchain being filled? So in the future, it may not be 4 years, it may be three, it may be five, it depending on how the blockchain gets filled.
Yeah, you are correct in that. And it's been a little bit, so historically it's been a little bit longer each time. So it hasn't been exactly 4 years, but it's been maybe like 4 years and 1 month. I think the current projection is, it happened in May 2020. I think the current projections in June 2020 at some point, or 2024, excuse me.
Right.
Um, but what that does is it makes it more difficult for miners. And so, that's the thing that really worries me right now is I think there's like globally 50 public Bitcoin mining companies. And we're seeing a lot of these energy costs go up, like we kind of said. So the way Bitcoin miners make money is they're capitalists at the end of the day. So they try to mine as much Bitcoin as possible, utilizing those machines, but also utilizing the least amount of power, and also finding ways to get those power sources for extremely cheap. Whether it's a couple cents a kilowatt hour or what have you. But what worries me is that we're having the hash rate kind of keep increasing, which means that less and less is more miners are coming online, so less and less is mined by each miner. But the price has been relatively stable, and so what that
So
means
more
is
miners, they're splitting the pie. The pie's not getting any bigger, but they're still splitting that same pie, so your slice is getting smaller.
exactly. And so a lot of these companies are not getting, you're already seeing them kind of maybe sell off some equipment. A lot of these have loans, Bitcoin backed loans. Some of them are having to sell off some of their Bitcoin reserves that they have. And of course, they mined them when they were at 60K. And then now, they're selling them off at 20K. So just to kind of make sure that they don't go under. So that's what I'm kind of looking out for in these next couple
Oh, we're
years.
experiencing a little audio difficulty with you.
I'm sorry about that. So hopefully I'm back now, and you can hear me. So, you there, Dividend Dave?
Oh,
You there? Can you?
unfortunately, your audio is just cut.
Dang.
Having real difficulty with your audio, which is very unfortunate because I wanted to also ask you about some other cryptos. It sounds like you're only
Can you hear
interested
me
in
now?
in Bitcoin, but yeah, try again.
Can you hear me now?
It's
Yeah.
we're having issues here, so
All right. Well, let
unfortunately.
me see
Oh, I
if I
think
can.
are you back?
Yeah, I don't know. Can you
No,
hear me now?
I think we're good.
Okay.
I think you're restored.
Okay, so sorry about that, but basically what I'm looking at is, to my point earlier, is just a lot of these miners. I'm going to be on the lookout for a lot of them that are using and finding cheap energy and kind of been positioning themselves for the long term. Like I kind of mentioned before, I had Ben Gagnon from Bit Farms on there. That company's primarily based in Ontario, and so I kind of like that one going forward. They're kind of
Yep.
diversifying all over the globe. They just opened up a new site in Paraguay, I believe. So they're kind of going down to Southern America. So, I think at the end of the day, those are some good companies, but there's a lot that are just using strict, electrical power from the grid, and those ones are going to have some tough times going forward.
Right.
But yeah, sorry for my audio cutting out. I don't know if it's
No, I
uh,
think we're good now. That's
yeah,
unfortunate. It happens because that's the world we live in. I have a
exactly.
couple sort of questions and points about Bitcoin and crypto. I guess first question, if you just want to touch on it briefly, El Salvador, Bitcoin Beach, uh, first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. What are your thoughts on El Salvador, the president of El Salvador? Anything about becoming legal tender? Your thoughts on Bitcoin in El Salvador?
Yeah, I mean, I'm extremely bullish on the Lightning Network. So, for those who don't really know what that is like every time you transact on Bitcoin, it's if you do it on the layer one, it's seemingly more expensive. And as the Bitcoin price has kind of gone up, it's a little bit slower. But what the Lightning Network does is it's kind of like a layer two technology. So you can essentially make a bunch of transactions and it's grouped into all in one. So they all kind of split the fees. So you do it for very cheap, and that's what kind of El Salvador is doing. A lot of these companies, like Strike, you mentioned Bitcoin Beach. Jack Mallers went down there and he kind of was pioneering the whole Bitcoin as legal tender in the Bitcoin Beach area. And so I think, those payment rails and other things like that are great. Has it been perfect for El Salvador, this whole time? No.
No, they
But
bought in really high, and suddenly Bitcoin's really low. But I'm a believer like you in crypto that, and again, this is going back to the halving. reduce the supply, the price has to go up, right? I can't see how Bitcoin doesn't hit another all-time high. People are probably right now looking at you're listening going, "You're crazy. Bitcoin will never be $69,000 again." Well, wait till the next halving or even the run up to the next halving and then after the halving and I'm confident, convinced that it will. I'm not going to say you reach 100K or reach 250K or throw at any stupid number. I'm just saying I can't see how, you know, supply decreases, demand stays the same or increases, and price goes up. It's supply and demand, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that that's gonna kind of continue. And, a lot of people are giving El Salvador a lot of crap right now. But I mean, at the end of the day, it was a third world country, right? So I mean, it's been
Yeah,
legal tender for a year. It's not going to be fixed overnight. El Salvador is one of those countries that can take a risk like this because of the financial situation it's in. And, this risk, it seemingly has paid off. There's a lot more tourism there, a lot
yeah,
more money is being flooded into the country. And, I think another thing is a lot of these Bitcoin companies are going to start moving down there, right? So,
right.
one thing that they made it for was that one law that the president Nayib Bukele recently made is that if you're a company that comes down and does and works in El Salvador but does business outside of El Salvador, so like many of these Bitcoin companies can do because everything's remote and in this digital age, you don't have to pay any business tax. So I mean, if you employ people and they live in El Salvador, they're spending money and whatnot, like
Yeah,
they're incentivizing companies to come down there. So at the end of the day, it's all about incentives, right?
yeah,
If people are unhappy with like having companies and like, you've already seen it in the United States, right? You've seen companies like Tesla, Apple, Amazon. A lot of these companies start to move from California to Texas because there's higher incentives to move out there. People don't want to be paying an arm and a leg to live in
yeah,
Silicon Valley and everything like that. And they don't really think it's the place to be anymore. So I think as long as incentives continue to line up, I think El Salvador is going to be just fine and probably thrive in the next few years. But are there going to be bumps in the road for Bitcoin as legal tender down there? Yeah, sure. There
sure.
definitely is going to be. There has been already. But I think, Bukele is kind of doing this way to potentially get reelected. I know that like he kind of has to step down as president in order to do that. I had Jaime Garcia on my State of Bitcoin podcast, and we kind of went through the ins and outs of that. But so I don't want to like misquote anything like that. So it's shameless plug for my web or my Bitcoin
Yeah,
podcast. If
no,
you
that's fine. I'll be sure to have all the links for your podcasts and newsletters in the description below.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, if anybody wants to check out that episode, he kind of goes into the way that Bukele could potentially do that because it's not like the United States where you could just run for a second term. But I think, like, if he runs again, that would be very good. And I think, like, overall, like, he's been cleaning up the crime and everything like that, too. So, I think Bitcoin as legal tender for El Salvador has been great. And I think, it has been perfect, but I
Yeah,
didn't expect it to be. So
yeah, exactly. Nothing's going to be perfect in this type of early adoption. Moving on from Bitcoin, but sticking with cryptocurrency. I believe you said you were only Bitcoin. You're like a Bitcoin maxi by the sounds of it.
yep, yeah, I would say that, yeah, for sure.
So, can I interest you in some XRP?
No, no, you cannot. I mean, like I've kind of gone into it, and I've I like to try to educate, I guess, people more so on it, and like tell people why I'm that way. Um, yeah, I've dabbled in the altcoins and everything like that before. I've lost money, got burned. And that's kind of made me into the Bitcoin maxi that I am. Is that I've seen a lot of people try to say, this coin is decentralized, or this coin does this better than Bitcoin. There's always all these claims, but
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, there's always that human element of it, and that's what I like about Bitcoin is
The human
decentralized.
element with Bitcoin is a ton more people have heard of Bitcoin. Like, still to this, like, we're only in getting to the end of 2022. There's a lot of people out there that have no idea what cryptocurrency is, but a lot of them have at least heard of Bitcoin, even if they don't know what Bitcoin is. They've at least heard of it. Those same people would have no idea what Ethereum or XRP or Solana, or I mean, the list goes on. They would have no idea what any of those other ones are, right?
Yeah, exactly. But and I mean the human element of a lot of those too is like right, like Solana had their blockchain shut off for some time, right? And like Ethereum, they're doing this merge and it didn't work out, super well. And there's a lot of these like CEOs and other things that are kind of like helping market these things, right? And I think the incentives behind cryptocurrency are just tremendous, right? Like I mean, you can say this crypto is does this, you can put it on Coinbase, pay some money to get it on Coinbase, and it's going to shoot up 100x or whatever. Then you can rug pull everybody, and
Yeah,
I've seen it time and time again. And I think that you know I'm always open to, like, I guess, listen to it, but at this point, like, I've just seen it so many times where I'm just like, I can't. Yeah, like it's going to be very difficult to convince me of that. And I
yeah,
think too, at the end of the day, like, by trade, I'm an engineer. And so I always think, like, all right, is this logical to do it this way? And that's what I think of a lot of these projects is like, okay, does this really need a blockchain? Because essentially, blockchain is a very slow and inefficient digital ledger. And
right.
so, you don't need that for everything. You don't need that for all these different, tasks or what have you. And so I think a lot of it is almost like the dot-com boom where you put dot-com behind anything and the stock price rises up. I think that's a lot of that with this Web3 and this cryptocurrency, blockchain, like a lot of these buzzwords that they're being thrown around. And a lot of Bitcoiners don't even say cryptocurrency anymore because although Bitcoin is like, quote unquote, like original cryptocurrency, like
Yeah,
if you ask a Bitcoiner, is Bitcoin crypto? A lot of them are going to probably say no, just because of that they want to distinguish the differences between the two.
yeah, good points. And I guess like use case, right? There's sort of going to your point, so many cryptos that get developed to become part of the blockchain or whatever, and then they're a crypto. They sit there on the blockchain, and then they look for a use case afterwards. And it should be the other way around. You should have the use case first before you develop that crypto.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people call, Bitcoin like the boomer crypto or whatever. And like, just because it's like boring, right? It's like Bitcoin at first was real sexy. It's this, cryptocurrency and all this going to change the world. But now everybody kind of understands the use case for it. And it's really just for like digital payments. And
Yeah,
because of that, like people aren't, as excited about it because it's not, you know, changing all this and that. But I think that's kind of like the beauty behind it, right? Is that it's simple, it works, and it's been what since like late 2008, early 2009 when it was
yeah.
like kind of first. I think the Genesis block was mined early 2009. So, um, I think at the end of the day, like the use case has been almost proven at this point, and it'll
I'm gonna
kind of
pay
continue
ten
to be.
thousand bitcoins for one pizza.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, that's some pizza, right? So, I mean, I've heard a lot of those stories. I got first kind of exposed to it in 2012 when I was a freshman in college, and one of my buddies was at University of Texas, and he said, somebody came in his business school and told him about Bitcoin. He's like, it's the future. And then I didn't hear anything about it for like 6 or 7 more years. So I kind of wish I listened at that point in
Yeah,
time, but maybe I'd be in a different spot than I'm at right now. But you live and learn. And I think, like, at the end of the day, people get into Bitcoin at the price that they deserve. And I think, you know, being open minded and kind of doing a lot of research on this, I think everybody will kind of come around to the Bitcoin maximalism sooner or later. It just, hopefully, like, they don't lose a lot of money in the short term with,
right.
maybe dabbling in some of these projects that aren't the best.
So I'm kind of opposite. I have like a very small position in Bitcoin, but going back to XRP, I do have a lot of not a lot. I have a nice little chunk of XRP. Again, going back to it does have a use case. It does have the cross-border payment, etc. And hopefully, if ever the SEC lawsuit ever ends, maybe someday, maybe XRP will become one of the more well, it already is one of the more popular cryptos, but become one of the more, like you say, proven use case, proven methods of payment, right?
Well, see, that's what worries me right there, right? It's like you're like, well, if the SEC, kind of gets around it, right, or like SEC approves it at the end of the day, right? Because I mean, when there's multiple touch points, and it's not like truly decentralized, that's when something can be controlled. And so I think, as far as like the SEC and regulation goes, I think they love Ethereum. They love things like XRP
Oh,
because
they love Ethereum a little too much.
yeah, exactly. I mean, if you I think is on the World Economic Forum or something, they had it. One of the top articles was the Ethereum merge. And so like, that should be kind of some red flags around there because, that's something that they can like monitor a little bit more. The thing that worries me deeply is the development of central bank digital currencies or
Yes.
CBDCs. Maybe governments kind of trying to issue money and do it that way and trying to get rid of these privatized banks. Because then one, you're not going to get those juicy dividend stocks that we were talking about earlier, and
Yeah.
two, like you could just monitor everything that you're spending money on, right? So if you are out late and they'll cut off your spending, right? Or if you gamble too much, or if you watch porn or do something that they don't deem as acceptable.
Morally acceptable.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like kind of these things where you're going to, and obviously I'm not condoning any of that stuff. I'm just kind of using that as an example.
People are gonna
Whereas,
do it though, right?
yeah, exactly, right. So I mean, it's like at the end of the day, like, do you want all that kind of control from your government? Then it's kind of like big brother's always watching, right? Whenever you
Yeah.
want to spend any money anywhere, that's always going to be kind of a use case too. So I mean, I like the decentralized nature of Bitcoin because you got miners everywhere. You can have a miner in your home if you want,
Yeah.
and you could have a node in your home if you want to. And like I could have a node, and Michael Saylor, who has a ton of Bitcoin, can have a node, and I can own like 0.0001 Bitcoin, and he can own hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. But if I say I don't want this passed on my node, and he does, I have just as much say on my node as he does on his. So I
Right.
think that's like the kind of things that kind of draw me to it, is that it just it can't really be controlled, and the little guy has as much voice as the big guy too. So
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Great little segue at the end here. Different for this type of podcast, talking about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Bitcoin mining, et cetera, et cetera. It's been a great. We're well over an hour already, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Passive Income Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on any of the audio platforms, please be sure to subscribe. We're getting very close to 700 subscribers on YouTube, so that's exciting. And yeah, thank you so much to Brandon at Green Candle IT on Twitter. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast this afternoon, whatever time of day it is you're watching this.
yeah, of course. It was a pleasure coming on, and yeah, everybody subscribe to his channel and get him past 700. Let's do it.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much. And like I said, all your links will be in the description below. And signing off.
All right,
Click
man.
that
Thanks.
subscribe button. Join the podcast income posse.
Yeah, let's do it.